said, today we're going to dig into language structures, and which is a really cool topic. So I have a full day training to do in 20 minutes. So I'm going to see what I can do here. But then I do want to give you some time at the end to kind of connect and process kind of what I shared with you today. Okay. So we're going to dig into all things language and the importance of language and how it affects reading. So I always like to start with, what does that reading rope mean? So the language structure rope is focusing on comprehension at the word and sentence level. So we're going to get really, really tiny today. Right? So we're going to be zooming in on words, phrases, and sentences. There's a lot of comprehension and a lot of skill needed to tackle comprehension at that level. And so a lot of times we think about the big picture, the whole text, what the whole meaning is, but we're going to really zoom in and get tiny. So this one really focuses on morphology and syntax and how that contributes to meaning and comprehension. This is super important because if we can't process the syntactical structures of the language, we won't understand it. And it is beyond word knowledge, is probably the single most biggest deterrent to comprehension. But we don't always talk about it. We always think it's about vocabulary. Syntax really matters. So we're going to kind of dive into that. And so each of these things, and we may not always be aware of it, but the morphology and syntax do contribute to comprehension. But it's not just the meanings of words, it's really understanding that the order of the words means something and being able to understand that, okay? And where it becomes super critical is when we get into complex text. So these are the characteristics of complex text. So one characteristic is its purpose can be complex. Its overall text structure can be complex. But one of the biggest reasons why it becomes complex is the language features, which is where all of this falls. More complicated text, more informational text, content text, higher readability and lexile levels tend to have much more complex vocabulary and complex sentence structures. If we really want our kids to access complex text, we kind of have to teach them how to navigate that. And our instructional materials don't really call that out. So we want to be thinking about how we might do that. So each of these levels of language influence comprehension. So language structure falls in those first 4 boxes. And then next time, I think it is, we'll do text structure. But all of these kind of affect comprehension for our students. So just really fast, morphology, we talked about this in the vocabulary session, so I'm not going to talk a lot about it. But taking the time with students to really teach the meaning of the words and, understanding that how the root words, transfer from word to word, and that really explicit instruction and practice with that is going to help at the word level. But what's more probably critical is the prefixes and the suffixes of how those create meaning and change meaning. And when we're thinking about at the word level, the suffixes become super critical because it starts like with suffixes like ly, I'm looking at, that's why I was thinking about this. We're starting to move into syntax and grammar and what the purpose of the word is. So the suffixes can change the purpose of the word, which then affects its role in the syntactical structure. And it makes it more, so these are just pictures you've probably have seen before, because I think I shared these in the vocabulary one. But very, very explicit teaching of that. But I know that is done in upper grades, but I also wanted to show what it might look like in our primary grades. So introducing to our students that the suffixes changes the purpose or the meaning of the sentence. So it's not just the changes the meaning of the word, right? But it changes the meaning of the idea of the sentence. So when we add an S, it changes the whole meaning of how many people or how many items, right? Of moving into plural. Or when we change the ending to ed, it changes the whole context to a different time and moving it into past tense. particular reading rope. And again, it works with all the other reading ropes. None of them are ever in isolation, but it's about using the morphemes to help understand what the meaning of and the syntactical structure of the sentence. Okay. So these are just some pictures for you guys you can browse. Teaching them that is going to be very, very important. I really wanted to spend the bulk of our time on the syntax because we haven't really talked about that. The first major thing is that we want to teach students. It's not about teaching grammar or parts of speech, but we want students thinking about what role the word plays in the sentence. Because sometimes words change parts of speech. They're not all, a noun isn't always a noun. Sometimes it can become something else. Teaching them when they are reading at the word or sentence level to really think about what role is that word playing in this sentence and what information is it giving us. So they basically fall into these groups over here. So there are words in the sentence that are really telling us more about who or what is doing something. Now we usually associate those with nouns, getting them to think about who did what or did it. At the sentence level, getting them to talk about, well, who are they talking about in the story? What did that thing do? Or what are they talking about? But then getting them to understand that there's also words that give us more details. And in the key researchers in this area, they call these namers instead of nouns, but you can call them whatever you want. But they call them the namers, but that there was words in the sentence. And their job is to teach us more about the who. So when we're reading text, and I'll show you some examples of this in a little bit later, but teaching kids to pay attention at that level, at the sentence level. So who or what is it about, right? So these are kind of prompts we had. What do we know about them? How many are there? What kind are they? Which ones are we talking about? Getting them to get into the details of comprehending at the sentence level. And then same thing with pronouns. The pronouns can be a big mystery for our students, right? So they don't, who is it? Who is the pronoun referring to? Who up here? What is the relationship? So pronouns refer us to one of these guys up here, or who or what. So really, when we're at the sentence level or even the phrase level, kind of teaching that. And then knowing that there's words in the sentence that start with what they're doing. Right? And again, can be verbs. We can call it whatever we want. So I think the big thing that we want to be thinking about with this particular strand is not focusing on parts of speech, but focusing on what role words play in a sentence and how those words help us understand what the author is saying. So what does this look like? So I'm going to start in kinder because I know I have some of my kinder friends here. So this starts all orally. We just start with teaching them the concept of a subject and a predicate. Like there's a who and a what, and doing that with all of our text. So constantly prompting them to look at the word or listen to the word, as they're learning how to read and what role it plays. So kind of here's my No David example, right? But asking them these types of prompts, who is named or what is named? So when we're doing a read aloud, asking them that question and how they know that, right? And they can use that pictures, they can use words, and then asking them, well, what do we know about who or what is named? So these really beginning prompts will help them start thinking about there's these roles. So the purpose of the sentence is to tell me about somebody, and it's telling me what they're doing. And so what are they doing? And what else do we know about them? And getting them to stop and look at one sentence at a time, or even one phrase, and asking them orally to discuss, what do we know from this one piece of information? In comprehension instruction, we tend to go for the big picture or the big ideas, right? Or, character setting, plot, and sentence structure, text structure, right? But sometimes we want to stop and pause more at the syntactical level. And then we can do a lot of oral practice with our students with images, right? So just put a picture of whatever text you're reading and getting them to start, obviously, whole group, and then move to partners, and you can actually move to writing. But the boy is standing on the chair, right? The boy is reaching for the jar. And by doing a lot of repetitive practice and getting them to practice the subject and the predicate is going to explicitly teach them the text structure, or the most common text structure that we use with our young ones. So here, then you can kick it up a notch, right? Then we can launch it into prepositions, which is in kindergarten, right? That is one of our language standards in kindergarten, is that they understand this concept of prepositions. So then taking it on a little bit later in the year. So the boy is standing on the chair in the kitchen. So getting them to really practice that oral language, and then we can, after that oral practice, we can take that to writing. So just getting them comfortable with, at the sentence level, working on the who and the what, you know, and really working on that syntactical structure and working on that in their writing. Then we can take it up in complexity with our older students, right? We can do the same thing, right? And we can do that with even images with our older kids. If you have students that are struggling with syntactical structures and don't always have strong syntax, we can just give them an image. So I pulled this right off the cover of a benchmark unit, right? And getting them to use the image, right? So the volcano is erupting, right? The red volcano. In the image, we see an erupting volcano and the lava is flowing down the mountain, right? So teaching them orally how to really have those more complex syntactical structures. Okay, so we can do that with images, and then we can really push that into more, again, getting more and more complex. But I actually love doing this with images to start, and then taking it to text, because an image is a text, taking to what they're reading, but getting kids to really practice those syntactical structures. Then another thing that we can easily do is do text discussions and teaching them this routine. So making this an anchor chart in your classroom and teaching them a process where partners talk about this. So give them a sentence or a paragraph, a small chunk of text, and then the partners have to ask each other. So partner A says, who or what did it? And then partner B would have to answer the dog, or they have to give the answer. So getting them to zoom in and paying attention to comprehension at the sentence level. What did it do? It crawled, right? And so on and so on. You guys understand. But teaching students a routine for discussing at the sentence level and getting them to really pay attention to the detail that the author is giving in that sentence. So here's another one. So we can also do same thing, but this time I'm going to do it with pronoun. So a lot of times students don't understand text because they don't know who the pronoun is referring to, right? And a lot of times we just skip over it, making the assumption that they do know, but they don't always know that. So again, we can take a paragraph out, let's find the pronouns, let's circle them. And then they can go, who or what did it? Well, it's the ancestral Puebloans, right? So, but then who is they? Who is they referring to? Who is there referring to? Because by the time we get, because this is a pretty complicated sentence, right? It's not that easy. When we get down here to their old homes, they may not know that this there relates all the way back up to the first sentence in the paragraph. So really this rope is about slowing down, teaching students comprehension at the sentence level, and really focusing on some of the syntactical challenges and complexities within the text. So that's one way that we can kind of really work on this one. The second is with prosody instruction. And I don't know if any of you joined me on one of my previous ones on reading fluency. Prosody is where we read with expression and meaning. It's about teaching kids that punctuation means something, and punctuation causes us to pause, but it also chunks the information syntactically. We can, teach them, and I'm sure you've seen Eat, Shoots, and Leaves before, one of my favorite books, but teaching about the importance of commas. If we don't pause at the comma, it has a completely different meaning, or even use the comma. So there's that one. So, and it just uses fun images. So if you're not familiar with that book, you might want to take a peek at the video. It's super fun. Getting them to learn how to use punctuation marks for meaning and comprehension. So I could say, look at that huge hot dog. Or if I want to pause here, look at that huge hot dog. How does that change the meaning? And engaging them in conversations and pointing that out to them can be really helpful, because a lot of times they just read through it and they don't really stop to pause and think about what the structure is, what the grammar is doing. And again, here's another video if you guys are interested in it. Taking that then to scooping, because as good readers, we read in syntactical chunks. You may not know that, but you do. So when you do a read aloud, you do it with automaticity and you don't even think about it. So you read the subject together, and you read the predicate together, and you read prepositional phrases together, and you read clauses together. And you naturally put pauses in between them and organize those words together for meaning. So again, this is all at the sentence level. So we would take one sentence or two sentences, right? It's never a big deal what we're doing with this particular one. It's never a whole text, but really talking about, well, who is the who? Like, what is the subject? The distant mountains. So when we read that, we would read those together. So the distant mountains look cold and dark. And so that's a phrase that goes together. So it's really about taking them to the phrase level, and it can be individual words, but mostly it's phrases, to aid in helping them understand what is it talking about, who, and what did they do? Where did it occur, and those types of things. So we can use colors around that, highlighting that with our students. So notice I'm not really teaching grammar. I'm more approaching the text on the meaning. How do we use the role the word is playing to help deepen our comprehension and our meaning of what the text said? So again, here's an example. So we could take students through which words phrase together. So commas, obviously, but it's more than that. Sometimes there's other times. But what is the role of that phrase? So the dignified Dalmatian, what is that doing? It's introducing to us the who and describing it. And so getting them to talk about at that very specific sentence level, what role that word or phrase is doing and how it helps us with meaning. Okay. And then we can do the same thing with clauses. So I know we're getting more into the upper grades. We tend to teach that a little bit later in our grades, but I always want to, cover the span of TK5. But then how does that clause change the meaning or contribute to the meaning or contribute to what the author is trying to convey? So, and again, we can get into teaching them the different types of clauses, but that's not the point of this session. It's more, how do you read it and comprehend it? So that might be done in your grammar writing kind of instruction, but this is going to be a hard sentence, right, guys? As the enormous wave approached the coastline, the water thundered and the people raced in the other direction. That's a pretty complex and tactical structure. So if you don't unpack that sentence with them, and what is the role of each component? Who is it talking about? Well, it's talking about a wave. What did it do? It approached the coastline. What are all these phrases doing? And how does that create meaning? And then we can also do this during ELD. There's ELD standards specifically related to this, because these are challenging for all learners, but they're going to be especially challenging for students acquiring an additional language with a different syntactical structure. So with our students with additional languages, we actually have to teach them the syntax very explicitly. What is the prepositional phrase doing? Why does the author use this? How is the author combining ideas and getting them to talk about that? So again, marking up the text, So you can kind of see, I've just kind of annotated ones for you. But looking at what is the role, what's the and doing? What is the for example doing, right? And getting them to really kind of dissect language at the sentence level. And then another way that we can kind of do that, so just kind of working on that as we're reading out loud. So working on teaching them how to read phrases with phrases and meaning and syntax and all those things. We can also do think alouds. So, and we can do this in any grade. So I'm reading this text and something that I'm reading with students, and I pause and stop and say, okay, who is this sentence talking about, right? Who is the action? So we can do it during think alouds as well. The more that we do, and not overkill, guys, like 1 or 2 sentences, a text, like this is not like, 20 minutes. This is like a couple minutes where we talk about it, but really, again, dissecting the sentence and what it means. And I really, especially, as we get into the older grades, I like this concept of highlighting, of them looking for the different sections of the sentence and what role they play, and how does it help us with understanding. So here's another example. So many countries are addressing pollution. Environmental degradation continues to create devastating human health problems each year. Is that going to be a challenge for our students? Hugely. So again, I see this sentence in my text that I'm reading, right? And I wouldn't do it on a first read. I would do it on a second or a later entry into the text, and then we're going to unpack that sentence. Let's take a look at what does that sentence mean? Okay, what's the although mean? Who is this talking about? What does this mean? And we can even get into some vocabulary with this particular sentence as well. And then a final, I don't know if this is the final one, but another one that kind of is, and again, that's kind of what I was just alluding to, is picking a juicy sentence or a juicy section from what you're teaching that week. So before I was kind of doing it this phrase and the sentence level. Now I'm going to say a juicy section, right? So notice I'm going bigger and bigger chunks. So we can start at the word level, then we can go to the phrase level, the clause level, the sentence level, and then we're going to go to like chunk level. I don't know, or a paragraph or a more meaningful chunk. Really asking them to go into that paragraph and say, who or what is this talking about? Going to help them with understanding main idea or important details. And then giving them to go in next is, well, what are those people doing? Are those who's doing? And what is some of the things that are happening? What are some of the actions? And what do we know about them? What do we know about the people that visit? So it starts getting them focused in more at the descriptive level, right? So here's the prompts I love to use is, how many do we have? What kind do we have? Which ones are they talking about? This is some pretty serious in-depth comprehension work that really needs to be done if we want our students to tackle a complex text. Because if we don't slow down and do some of this work with them, they'll skip right over all these words and not really have a deep meaning about what this paragraph is about. But we also have to teach them how to do it. So again, here's another example on soap bubbles. Once you've taught them how to do it, then they can go in, what words were at, look at the noun phrases, giving them prompts to kind of analyze a text, and those types of things. Okay. So this can be examples. And then also getting them coming back to the larger passage, not in one sentence, but the larger passage. Who are all the pronouns? What are they all talking about? What's this thread? Are all of them about the starfish? Yes, they are, right? So what do you think the main idea of this is going to be? Well, it's certainly going to be about the starfish, right? So it helps get them to the comprehension of the bigger picture or the bigger idea. Here's another example of a pronoun trace. I love the Sneetches, one of my favorite books. But look at all these pronouns. And this is a really complex one because the they can either be the plain belly Sneetch or the star-bellied Sneetch. So if you don't slow down and talk about, well, which Sneetch are they talking about? The students won't have a deep comprehension of this text, okay? So again, looking at what makes the syntactical structure complex and then slowing down within a chunk of it. So I did want to point out that you will find like little prompts. They're hard to find, but in our instructional materials, this is Wonders, right? They have like these little prompts that pop up in the margins about complex text that direct you to think about that. They're basically pointing out this is going to be something that could be syntactically challenging for kids. And then you're also going to find them in your ELD resources. You're going to find them a lot in the ELD resources, either the integrated or the designated. And then these are from Benchmark. But again, they have examples, but again, it's going to be buried in text. So I just want you to just be watching for it, right? So in Benchmark, they call it language, understanding cohesion or use, but it's highlighted with the word language. And that's really when they're indicating to work at this level. So I just wanted you to, and then in Wonders, it's ACT. So those are kind of your highlights of where in the materials, the authors of those materials have already identified that this is a place where syntax is probably going to be a problem. So slow down and break it down for your learners and teach it to them, okay? And then my favorite is sentence building. So I'm going to take it to writing now. And so I used to do this all the time when I was in the classroom, and it helped. I was teaching, the last grade that I taught was 3rd grade, and this is what I got from every student. Like I got like really basic sentences, right? And I didn't get really anything advanced. So first starting with, the basic structure of who did what to whom or what, right? So teaching them that and teaching them how to write those sentences, adding the where, and then expanding it to how many, what kind, what, and those types of things, and getting them to answer those questions. So here's how I used to do it. This is actually a picture from my classroom, like many moons ago. So this is before, like, this is the dark ages, guys, okay. But we didn't have a lot of technology, but I actually put like the different syntactical things on different colored cards. And then they had to go build sentences with them. And then, write them or share them with a partner, right? And so I showed them different syntactical structures, and they had to work on building sentence building because we had very basic simplistic sentence structures, and their syntax was very simplistic, basically. And then here we go. Then here's where I did it with images. I found this on the internet, but I thought that what a cute way to do this in kindergarten, right? Like give them blocks or cubes or whatever you want to use. And then they have to build sentences with them. So that would be another fun way to do that. And then here is another image. I always try to find images because I think those are helpful. But I used to do lots of sentence building in pocket charts or in tables. But then here's another example of how we do this. So we start with, basic subject predicate, Bob played. And then what did Bob play? Well, Bob played soccer. And then when, right? And where? And really getting them to build their sentences and really expand their ideas. And that will really help them not only learn the syntax and help them with comprehension, but it will actually enhance their writing. So here's just different ways I have done it. I've done sentence patterning charts. So I just and then these are Jamboards. And if you click on them, they're building sentences in the Jamboard. So if you want a technology version, and then I used to do a lot of sentence imitation. So we would pick a really great sentence from a text we were reading. So we read it, we talked about its meaning, and then I would have students write similar sentences using the same syntactical structure, but around different topics. And again, that was another way to really get kids to embrace syntax and understand it and understand their meaning. So those are just some. So I used to call it, we're gonna copy great writers. And that's what I used to do with my students as well. Remembering that syntax that we use is really attached to our purpose for language. So the syntax that we use to express an opinion is different than summarizing. So the way that we communicate those are different. So we need to teach our students that the syntax isn't always the same. So when we're doing, for example, when we're doing compare and contrast, we usually use and or both. So we usually use some type of connection word. So really helping them know that, so that when they see a lot of and or both in a sentence or in a text, then we know, oh, this might be doing some compare and contrast. So really pointing that out with our students. And again, we can do that orally in kindergarten. We can do it by dissecting a text in an older grade, and we can do that in writing with our students as well. So there's lots of ways to do it. So in summary, if we want to really strengthen this rope in conjunction with all their other ropes, we got to read a lot of complex text, whether that's orally, us reading, us modeling, the kids reading, let's see, however we're doing that. Students need a lot of exposure to complex text because that's where we're going to learn the more complex syntactical structures. We have to explicitly teach them the morphemes and the syntax. Don't assume they know it, especially if you have students acquiring an additional language. Okay, they may not have it, and the syntax in their language may be very different. So we have to teach them that very explicitly. We can interact with this rope, reading, speaking, and writing. I mean, listening, yes, too, but specifically in those, right? And then study great models. Let's look at this great sentence. Look at this great phrase. Let's look at this great paragraph and talk about why is this great and how is the author using language to make it great. And then lastly, as I started off with, don't focus on the name of the part of speech. I mean, if you teach them that, that's fine. That's not the point. The point is, what role is that playing in the sentence? And how does it convey meaning? And that's really what this rope is about.